Here we are. Okay, this is the preview for episode 53, Quantitative Imagination. This is our next episode on the realm of ideas is free to all. We're a little bit later than usual for our preview, and that's because we were kind of like, because of the holiday, we were at the gym today because we can't go there tomorrow. So we're kind of a little bit later. We just came back from our favorite restaurant in the neighborhood, and we're kind of like getting down to it. So basically, I'll read the piece that kind of has got me kind of engaged in this. Again, this comes from the Century of Genius chapter in Whitehead's Science in the Modern World. So he says, at the beginning of the Western modern period, Da Vinci and Bacon stand together as illustrating the various strains which have combined to form the modern world, namely legal mentality and the patient observational habits of the naturalistic artist. In the passage which I have quoted from Bacon writings, there is no explicit mention of the method of inductive reasoning. Now, I read the piece before where we talked about Bacon and how Bacon was kind of like symbolic and kind of fundamental to the idea of those things, which was experimentation and the inductive method, that basically set the tone for the beginning of the century of the genius, even though this beginning of science probably starts prior to the 17th century. Probably starts in the 16th century, but I mean, again, with Leonardo, I mean, he dies in the 16th century actually, kind of. So I think that this kind of talks about the beginning of these particular premises. But what I'm talking about is basically the beginning of the understanding of the inductive method, and I think that's one of the things that I think he points out about something that is really much more to be learned from Leonardo in terms of that possibility as the idea of the observation of the naturalistic artist. And that brings me to what might seem a curious title, which is the idea of quantitative imagination. Most people think of quantitative as a series of a number of things, like 10 rocks or 12 chairs or whatever. But in this case, what it really means is the accumulation of imaginations as a network. So it's not just simply the fact that like there is a quantity of imaginations, it's the correlation of how they're put together. And I think that's indicated as you'll be able to see more in terms of the way in which he talks about that particular method, and that as it relates to this this idea. So anyway, anything to say, Puddle? Any ideas or
Sorry, I'm
comments?
having hay fever.
You've been really
allergies.
struggling. I
Oh,
still
my
feel so bad
God,
for you.
the pollen is just through the roof. Yes, quantitative imagination, the way I view it, is a parchment skin-like accruement of ever inventive strata. They are thin layers that would almost go down or rise you up. In fact, like brushed layers of lacquer. I would use a Japanese lacquer piece as a metaphor for quantitative imagination in the creative, curious, inquiring human mind, whereby each individual layer is so thin and so refined and so fine that it's almost imperceptible, and that just the artisan or the thinker who puts the layers down or accrues their ideas and musings and creative thoughts would actually understand how many 30, 40 layers are brushed in to make a piece of lacquer.
Right.
I see quantitative imagination in the same way.
Yeah, I would agree, because I think a lot of times, people think about, the way in which something's put together, and they say the overall quality of a piece, which is kind of like the inherent natural inclination. But I think one of the things that Whitehead at least made me aware of in this chapter was the idea of the interlacing of certain consequential concepts as relates to the whole. So I think the term is like accumulation, right? So it's not just that you can talk about the overall brilliance of a piece, but in this case, you could kind of talk about how the pieces are intertwined and interlaced in order to kind of create the whole, because they're actually somewhat independent. It's not simply one imagination, it's an accumulation of thoughts and imaginations to create a kind of like cohesive whole. So that's pretty much what we'll be talking about. And this leads up to this thing that we've been kind of leading towards for a while, which is the necessity of original ideas, and how those things not, and the kind of significance of a lack of that at the present time, I think, as we're kind of like, again, kind of somewhat overly obsessed about technique. Anyway, so anything, last words, P?
Yes, synaptic learning. I think quantitative imagination it's completely understudied and really underknown. I believe that what goes on in the synapses, like that's where many of our memories are stored. In fact, I believe those are the engines of generative imagination, and what is stored in the spaces, which are not empty by a long shot, are in fact the ever blossoming seeds of quantitative imagination.
That's true.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think you can also, in terms of
Yeah.
accumulation, you think of accrued, a kind of accreted as words that kind of like, the synonyms for this.
I like
kind of
cinnamon.
Cinnamon too.
Yeah,
Yes.
cinnamon is
Yeah. So happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
Happy
And we'll see you
Thanksgiving.
on Sunday.
Yeah.
Okay. And as we always say, the realm of ideas is free to all, and it's to the benefit of all for us to keep it that way. All right. See you soon.
See you. Bye.